All right, I'm just going to briefly summarize the slides for anyone that missed the first part of it, and we'll just link this to the rest of the presentation. I'm not going to go into full detail, but I'll at least have the slides so you can reference it. Don't forget that anyone who participated should also get a PDF of the slides, so you can use that as well. So the presentation is called How We Learn Movement or How We Learn to Move, the prescriptive to emergent continuum. And it's just this idea that there are different ways of coaching depending on the needs of the group and how you design your sessions can be affected by what your belief about the role of the coach is and how it is that people learn how to move. So, without going into too much detail, I opened up the presentation with a paraphrasing from John Holt from his 1964 book, How Children Learn. And he says, imagine if we taught speech like a school subject, sounds first, then syllables, then words, then grammar, all before conversation. Most kids would give up long before they ever said a sentence. And, what he's talking about here is we have this tendency whenever people are learning something to break it down into all its constituent parts, sort of reduce it down to the smallest bits, try to analyze those bits, and then try to build them all back together. But that isn't how people often learn. People often learn through the sort of the gestalt. They kind of can put bigger learnings together at a time. We don't necessarily need to break everything down. It makes sense to break things down into little reductive parts if you're trying to systematize something or kind of create a product that can be repeated, but it doesn't actually mimic how it is that people often learn. So here's a picture of a very unimpressed baby who just wants to talk, but is being taught all these specific words and letters and phonemes and things like that. And actually, the baby would be fine if you just left it alone and gave it some time to look at the world and learn how to talk. Um, so this has obviously it's got some carryover for how people are taught how to move. So in this picture, it's a joke. Imagine that there's a small toddler, small boy who's being taught how to walk by a coach, and he's saying, "Okay, these are the different angles at your hips. These are the different angles in your joints. These are the muscles I want you to use. Here's the motor pattern. I want you to try to repeat it over and over and over again." And probably what's happening here is the boy's taking some steps, and the coach is getting frustrated because the steps don't look like they do in the textbook. So he's having him do it over and over and over again until his steps are perfect. Now, obviously, this is poking fun at the whole idea, but also I think there's some truth to it because it is often how people try to teach movement. A lot of times they have this idea that there's this one sort of perfect platonic ideal of movement. Um, and then it's our job as a coach to get people to converge on that. So today's talk, we're going to talk about how we're taught to move, how we're taught to teach people to move. We're going to talk about some traditional theories on movement and motor skills. We're going to talk about some new ideas in movement. By ideas, a lot of these ideas are well over 100 years old. We're going to talk about why this matters, how to apply this in real life, and then we'll give some additional resources at the end. So if you look in this picture, it's going along with what we've already talked about. If you look in textbooks, sometimes you have these sort of two-dimensional models, these sort of sagittal plane models of somebody walking or running or doing some of their movement. And when you see it in two dimensions on the textbook, it sort of looks very simple. You know where the forces are, but then they also simplify it a lot. Maybe they assume that it's flat ground. Maybe they assume that they're moving in a uniform direction at a uniform speed. But in real life, when we're interacting with the world around us, there's way more factors. So you see the person on the right. And what's happening is they're not just walking in a straight line, they're walking over some rocks. Maybe the rocks are wet. Maybe they're trying to get somewhere quickly. Maybe there are other things in the environment that they are reacting to. For all we know, he could be trying to dodge bees or something. And all of a sudden, those perfect models for how we're supposed to walk go out the window. And we'll talk about this a little bit later into the presentation. So, the way that I was originally taught how to coach is there's this assumption that is especially true in strength and conditioning and weightlifting and gym culture and things like that, that there's a correct way to do a movement. And that's a reflection of the fact that we're in a gym using specific equipment, moving heavy weights. So there are some movements that might be more biomechanically efficient. Um, but when you get out into the real world, it gets much, much more complicated. And even within that, you need to account for the fact that people have different builds, different levers, their legs or backs could be longer, they could have a history of injuries, and trying to impose a sort of one size fits all form on people is very rarely going to work out well. So, in these traditional models, there's this assumption there's a correct way to do the movement, and the coach, they know what the correct way is, and it's their job to transmit the technique to the client. And then through drilling and repetition, we can eventually converge on this correct form. So, whether it is tennis serves or how to free throw in basketball or how to throw something, there's a correct way to do it. And by cueing and coaching, and drilling, eventually people will get this one correct way. And you can see from the image right here, you've got Plato right there talking about what the platonic ideal of a serve is. And then you can see his coaching client is getting flustered because she's trying to listen to all these different cues and the perfect way to do it. And actually, she's getting really confused by the whole process. So, if we're going to talk about traditional learning models, one of the things we should talk about is this information processing model. And also, I guess, talk about the central processor, which is the idea that everything is going through your brain specifically, and your brain is controlling all your movement. And obviously, on one level, in a way that is true, but it doesn't mean that everything is going into your head and that your brain is working like a computer and through the power of cognition that you are trying to put all this together. I'm going to go ahead and switch to the other bit of the presentation now so you can catch up with that situation. Oh, cool. We've got recording in progress.
Yeah, sorry,
Um,
it's my bad. I completely forgot to press record.
No, that's okay. It's because you were so enthralled. All right. So we've got this idea in this traditional information processing model that the brain is the control center, um, and the movement is the output. Any kind of errors in this perfect form are problems that have to be corrected over time. Good form is predefined, and the coach's role is to diagnose, correct, and cue. Part of this model sort of assumes that the way we learn how to move is that we memorize millions and millions and millions of perfectly scripted motor patterns that fit a specific problem. So, like, if I'm going to learn how to walk up a step, I have my walking up a step motor pattern. If I learn how to catch a ball, then I have my catching a ball motor pattern. And you can see that this model gets really unwieldy really quickly. What that image is right there is the image of this brain who's planning everything out and is actually getting angry because the body is sorting things out on its own. And that's alluding to what we're going to talk about, which is the way that a lot of theorists and a lot of practitioners think about movement now is they no longer think of this idea of the CEO brain living in your head, reacting to everything and giving you these pre-programmed movement patterns. Really what we've learned is that movement, cognition, such as it exists, and reaction happen in the entire body. So it's not that everything is constantly going back to the brain and the brain is telling you what to do, is that your body is a complex system. And the feedback you get from your hands, your feet, your eyes, your nose, your ears, your vestibular system, um, all the feedback that you get from interacting with the environment directly is how you actually really learn to move. So a good example of this is if I was trying to tell somebody, here's the correct technique for walking on an icy surface, I could tell you how to do it. And I'd say, here, you want to get your center of gravity. But the way you're really going to learn is you walk on ice a little bit and it's a little bit slippery. And then maybe you lower your center of gravity a little bit. You don't put your feet out in front of you. And very quickly, your body is naturally going to find an optimal solution without ever tapping into any kind of verbal system of somebody telling you how to do it. So this idea of having a little person, a little coach that lives inside your head, it's called the homunculus problem. And the issue is that a lot of old um, models for how we learn to move assume that there is this little person inside of you who's pulling all these levers and telling you what to do. Um, the issue is that this falls apart really, really quickly in the real world. And if you assume this is how people learn how to move and you give them all these very specific drills that work in a very specific situation, you find that in the real world, when people encounter stressful situations or differences or something unexpected happens, is that the transference often isn't as good and people end up finding their own solutions anyway. So what people would say is if you're interacting with the environment directly, instead of pretending that you're this all-knowing coach who knows every single contingency and every single problem, really you're better off providing different challenges and exposing people to different environmental situations. And then from there, they can come up with their own movement solutions that they can actually apply into the real world. Um, and this is good timing because as I was thinking about this, a paper, and let me just close this. So I'm going to show this again. Okay. A paper just came out this month, actually. It's called The Myth of Optimality. And it's a really long paper, but it's available for free. And essentially, this paper is sort of the culmination of a lot of the ideas that we've been talking about, and a lot of these ideas that have really come into vogue over the last few years, which is that there is no optimal solution to any specific problem that you can capture in terms of biomechanics or kinematics or things like that. And what I'm saying is we often get stuck in this idea of what is the correct or incorrect way to do something. But what this paper is saying is like it's absolutely ridiculous to talk about the best way of doing something because we can't define the why of the movement. And that sounds confusing, but I'll give you an example. So we can talk about anything. We can talk about walking. And I guarantee you that there are specialists and practitioners and clinicians out there who are going to tell you, look, this is the best way to walk. You want your feet forward. You don't want your hips in external rotation. Maybe you want to do a forward foot strike. I don't know, whatever. I'm just giving you a bunch of arbitrary different positions. But we don't know why people are walking. You could be walking for different reasons. You could be walking for speed. You could be walking for stability. You could be walking because you're carrying something heavy. You could be walking a specific way because you're avoiding an injury. You could be walking a certain way to be more energy efficient. You could be walking to be quiet. You could be walking to be loud. It could be social signaling. You could be walking in such a way to show people that you're angry. You could be trying not to draw attention to yourself. And there's so many different reasons for why people could be engaging in any one movement. It's just impossible to say this is the optimal way to do it. Same way with running, we fall into this trap of saying, well, this is the perfect gait. This is the way you're supposed to run, but we are not thinking about the why of the running, the context of the running. So people often get into this reductionist fallacy of saying, well, we got these athletes, we put them on a treadmill, and we were looking at the ground reactive forces, and we've decided this is the best way to run. But having a trained athlete on a treadmill at a certain incline, doing the same repetition over and over and over again is not how we interact with the environment when we go and do trail running, things like that. Next slide. Um, so one of the problems with this top-down coaching idea is that A, it assumes that there's a perfect form. Um, And it often strips away the context of why we're doing things. So this picture right here is just imagine somebody walking down the street and you have a bunch of judges scoring them based on how good they're walking. And that seems ridiculous. But actually, a lot of our ideas of good form, especially coming out of fitness and exercise, are equally arbitrary. They're what's called rules-based movements. And what that means is just like I've been talking about, people start off with this idea, this is what a good deadlift looks like. They don't actually think about the why of the deadlift or what it is that we're trying to accomplish or the body type of the person or any restrictions. They say, this is a good deadlift. We're going to try to get everyone to deadlift like this. And a lot of these assumptions come out of sports. They could come out of sports like powerlifting or perhaps Olympic weightlifting. So, example, Olympic weightlifting, if you're cleaning the bar overhead and then you do a strict press, that isn't going to get you a point, but you're not allowed to do a strict press out. What you have to do is you have to do a jerk and get out. And even if, from a task standpoint, your goal is to get something above your head, if you did it incorrectly, then you would not get the point. And sometimes we forget that in real life, there aren't judges sitting around deciding whether or not we're doing something correctly based on aesthetic expectations. Um, and one of the other issues with this model is that a lot of these models, these information processing models, these central CEO models of movement, they use this analogy. They pretend our brain is a computer. But our brain isn't a computer. So in this picture right here, you have a dog, someone's throwing a stick at the dog, and the dog, before it can go and catch the stick, it has to sit down and do all these calculations. It has to start thinking about, well, what is the curve? What is the velocity? What is the mass? What is the trajectory of the parabola of the stick as I'm throwing it? That's not how it works. We don't sit there and calculate those things. There's no math involved when organisms interact with the world. what they do is they just interact with it directly and they get better and better at interacting with it. So we act by engaging directly with the environment, not by planning predetermined motor patterns. And I think one of the other reasons why these predetermined motor patterns have become a popular way of thinking about things is if you're in the position of a coach or a teacher or something where you need to present yourself as an expert and you're leaning on whether it's a governing body or a set of credentials or something like that, you need to establish that you know what you're talking about because sometimes it doesn't feel good to say, well, I don't know what the best way is, but let's just play around and see what works for you. It doesn't feel good necessarily as a coach to say that because it doesn't put you on a pedestal, but also it doesn't always feel good for the learner because sometimes people do want to be told what the best way is. Um, but essentially, there's so many issues with this top-down way of thinking about how we learn to move that it's starting to break down, and we're getting away from this idea of a centralized controller, and we're moving more towards this idea of each ecological coordination or distributed cognition, distributed movement, distributed mind. There's lots of different ways of talking about it. So if anyone has read any guy Claxton, he's written about this a lot. But it's this. There's m multiple different branches of science are sort of coming to the same conclusion that we need to get away from this idea of everything happening in the brain and actually our body, our mind is distributed throughout our entire body, and we're a system interacting with other systems, which sounds complicated, but it just means that we've got a lot of things going on, whether it's balance, hunger, emotional state, things like that, and the world outside is complicated as well. So you're just two complicated systems that are going to interact with each other, and you're going to find something that works for you at the time. So a lot of this is what's called the ecological view. And for anyone who's ever been in any of the other talks, where I talk a lot about this concept of affordances, which is associated with J.J. Gibson. And we've got that picture down there of a door. And you see there's two things going on. There's a little sign that says push, and there's a great big handle. And the handle is telling you that you want to pull. An affordance is what it is something about the landscape or the environment around you that it elicits a certain behavior or invites you to engage with the environment around you. So this idea of ecological psychology is that because we're organisms and we evolved to move, if you think about it, millions of years ago, we were, essentially amoeba or little simple organisms, and they didn't have the central processor that was saying, okay, I want you to do this, then I want you to do this, then I want you to do this. It might be something like, oh, there's a light patch over there, move towards the light patch. Or um, we can probably eat that thing over there, so let's go ahead and try to eat that thing. And it sounds a silly way to think about it, but really what it's saying is that there's no need for some internal homunculus that's telling you what to do things. You're just directly interacting with your environment. So that little picture of the woman walking around, she just sees different opportunities to interact with the environment. Maybe there's an apple she could eat. Maybe there's a swing on the tree she could swing from. Maybe there's a log she could balance on. So we perceive in affordances, and what that means, it means the coach's job is to shift away from an instructor that's giving people specific movements to sort of designing these environments, coming up with these different affordances within the context of whatever it is you're trying to do, and giving people an opportunity to explore these affordances so they can come up with solutions that work for them. So this means that skill learning is nonlinear, it's adaptive, and it's messy. It's not about copying. So I have this nice little picture here of a little tree, a little sprout that is adapting to the environment around it. So instead of it being this sort of perfect kind of platonic ideal of what a tree will be, it's going to react to the rain, it's going to react to the sun, maybe it'll move towards the sun, it's going to react to the wind. And this plant is going to adapt to the world around it. And that's how we are as well. We're not these perfect um, snapshots of perfect movement. We adapt to the environment around us. Um, I feel like I've been talking a lot. I wonder if I should I might do a little pause here so we can talk about things and the implications of it, and then we can keep going. So let's see, Jill, do we have any questions?
If people want to, they can either unmute yourself or you can put questions in as we go.
Hey, it's Luke here.
Hey Luke.
Really interesting, man, because I remember when I was first kind of getting into fitness in the gym, and I'm 33 now, and I started when I was quite young, maybe like late teens.
Yeah.
What stopped me going back and what stopped me continuing was that fear of not doing the movement in the right way, and not doing it, to the T, how it should look, how everyone else, kind of all the big guys in the gym were doing it, and then just looking at
Yeah.
after really. But as I started jiu-jitsu at 25, that's when it became really playful for me. And actually just started exploring the body. And now I feel like and there was a strength and conditioning coach that just went to my gym and he gave me this 6 month plan. And it was dead basic. He said, don't worry about getting it right or wrong. He said, just do it. And then 6 months later, lo and behold, I am doing it in the correct way, quote unquote.
Yeah.
So it was that permission to be
Yes.
vulnerable, but also just to play and explore without judging myself. And it makes total sense just listening to you because I've heard you talk about it, but it's nice to take a deeper dive.
Yeah, yeah, you made so many good points there, and one of them, it's the term we always use as well, is just create an environment where people have permission to explore. I think there's actually probably a slide down the road that's going to say that. It's one of the things we talk about all the time. Like your co as a coach, or as the way we talk about coaching, is you're not an architect. You're not trying to create this perfect building. You're a gardener, and you're just trying to set the foundation so people can kind of figure out what works for them. And I think what's kind of especially, and what you just said, your story, I think is really common is that so many people we get our opportunities to move only come through the gym, and that's a bit sad because, the purpose of a gym is not necessarily to give people opportunities to move, which it is, but it's also to constrain the ways that you can move. And what I mean is, it's not as though gyms are just a big open space with some interesting things that you can climb and jump over and some heavy things to pick up. If you look at most gyms, there are a series of machines that take away options for movement. So when you're on a treadmill, it's going to dictate that you run in this specific way, all sagittal plane in a straight line. When you go to those rows of machines, it's going to say like, look, this is going to be your full range of motion, your elbow extension, your flexion, or this is going to be, whatever, how you work your pecs. Um, because yeah, it's sort of taking away options. Um, and I understand why that is because a lot of people sort of feel so alienated from their own physicality that if you gave people an empty room and said, okay, run around, have fun, get a workout in, a lot of people aren't really going to know how to do that. They're just going to stand there. It's a bit
Yeah.
like with dancing, I think one of the good things about like Scottish country dancing or line dancing is if you just get a bunch of teenagers in a room and tell them how to dance, it's going to be really awkward. But if you say, okay, we're going to follow these steps, then it gives people an opportunity to learn more. But because all of our sense of movement, all of our opportunities for movement, they come from these gym assumptions, it means that people automatically assume there's a right and wrong way to do things. And then they take that logic and they try to apply it in the real world where things are much more ambiguous. Um, and I think people become afraid of even moving their own bodies unless they have some qualified professional to tell them this is how you do this, this is how you do
Mhm.
that. I think, yeah, it's interesting, Luke, what you're saying about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because for whatever reason Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a sport that's really embraced ecological dynamics, and it's funny because the initial way that it was taught, or even the way it is still taught a lot, is it still has a lot of rote repetitions of specific movements. Often the first 30 minutes of the class will just be repeating movements, but then the
Mm.
bit that everyone enjoys is usually the bit at the end where you get to roll around and play around a little bit. So yeah, so there's good tension there.
Yeah.
Um, any other questions, comments, observations?
Andrew, hi, it's Ellie here.
Hey, Ellie.
Hi. Yeah, so this it's really interesting, and thank you. I know a bit like Luke, I've heard these messages before, and it's only the more I'm kind of doing and facilitating myself and doing my and moving more myself that it kind of, really starts to make sense. I guess I've just got one question though, because I still feel a bit, there is a bit of a perception that I think people think you will, in inverted commas, crack things if you see things that might not be right. And we're saying there isn't a right. I get that. But I suppose I worry, being quite new to this, that I just don't want people to hurt themselves. So the other day I had a friend who was doing a kettlebell swing and was quite hunched when she was doing it. She hadn't really hinged, etc. And I guess I'm thinking, I suppose you want people to come to their own light bulb moments. So I think I said a couple of things like I could see to her, but I guess I'm reflecting and thinking, maybe we could have just gone back, or I could have we could have done some work with the dowel again to
Yeah.
maybe make her have her own. So I did, rather than
Yeah.
saying this is off here and here, I suppose I'm just trying to say, if you see things that might not be because
Yeah.
we have talked about points of performance, and there are things that, so it's a balance of what you correct, I guess, and what you just let go. So I just
Exactly.
wondered if you could talk a bit more about that, particularly for those of us who, I guess I'm still on the building my own confidence for not hurting people,
Yeah.
not hurting
Well,
myself.
Ellie, you perfectly anticipated what I wanted to talk about next anyway, which I wanted to talk about this contrast between ecological dynamic approaches and then more traditional coaching and the kind of tension between the two. And it's one of the things that I always struggle with. I mean, not me myself, just alone, but I think a lot of people struggle with is if you want to bring movement to people, especially movement, people who don't have a history of movement, and you want to make sure that it's beneficial and they can make progress, then inevitably you're going to have to create a sort of systemic way of introducing people to movement. And what I was just saying, it's easy to get this trap, and I fall into all the time. I don't want to pretend that there aren't better or worse ways of doing things based on your goals, but it really depends on really thinking about why you're doing a movement and what you're trying to get out of it. And this tension, it comes because if we are in a sort of outdoor exercise environment and we're teaching people specific movements, um, you do want to help people get towards those movements, and you do want people to build up confidence and be able to do things safely. Not that people, I think people are much more robust than they give themselves credit for. But if we're starting off the assumption that we want someone to do a kettlebell swing and kettlebell swing is a good thing to do, um, we do want to give people the sort of tools so that they can find the movement and find an efficient way to do it. Um, so one of the things that I want to clarify, and then I'm going to go back a few slides and we'll revisit it again from a different angle, is there's no rule if you're someone who's decided that you do like this idea of ecological dynamics or constraints-led approach in coaching. There's no rule that you can't cue people, and there's no rule that you can't do verbal coaching. I think sometimes people fall into this side of purity of saying no, you can never coach or directly cue anybody. And that's not true. You absolutely can. But one of the things I always really try to instill in new coaches is make sure you think about the why and make sure that you interrogate why you're doing it. And what I mean is you don't want to cue people for the sake of cueing somebody if something looks wrong. You really want to think about, well, where did those standards come from. So a good example that we use quite a lot is on press ups. On press ups, a lot of times when people are taught to do press ups, they're taught to keep their elbows in like this. And if the elbows come out at all, then it's like, no, that's wrong. You got to stop doing it right now. But no one has ever really established why that is wrong or what the why of it is. There's no reason why you couldn't teach yourself to do press ups in this way, as long as you introduced it nice and slowly and you got to the point where you were comfortable being into a more of I guess, an external rotation position. But sometimes people just memorize a set of standards and say, well, this is the good way, this is the bad way. So you really want to think about it. I'll get back to that in a second, Ellie, because I think that's a really good point.
Okay, thanks, Andrew.
Yep. All right, so I'll get back into this and we'll do some more questions. Um, so one of the issues that we try to address at WildStrong is like, well, what is the why of what we're doing? And what we're doing is we're trying to give people the tools and the confidence and the capacities and the capabilities so they can participate in real life. So that's what always kind of comes back to what we're doing. We're always trying to say, well, how can we ensure that people are confident running and jumping and picking things up and getting over things and getting around things? So we do a lot of what's called task-based training. And that's sort of in contrast of that rules-based training of saying, well, the difference between how do I pick something up and move it around and get it from A to B versus this is how you do a deadlift. A deadlift is a specific movement with specific points of performance that assumes you're probably using a barbell, and maybe you want to go into a powerlifting competition or something versus if I want to pick up a heavy sandbag and get it from A to B, how do I do that? And a big point here is this idea of skill transference. Maybe I'll find, there we go. This idea of skill transference. And the general assumption in the field is that we are going to benefit from more wide variety of complex nuance movements than a low variability repetition. So what does that mean? It means that the woman on the left who's doing trail running and she's navigating over rocks and different texture and going uphill and downhill and dealing with different temperatures and different textures, her body is going to be learning so much more from that experience, from that continued experience, than someone who's in a room running on a treadmill over and over and over again. And what we see is that this pattern seems to be true across all different kinds of movements. So another example that gets used quite a lot is, I think I stole this one from Rafe Kelly, is that if you had two brothers and they both decided that they want to get really good at upper body strength, and one of them joins a bouldering gym and spends a year just bouldering, and figuring out different ways, and then the other one has a pull-up program and he does, whatever, he does a 45-minute pull-up program every morning. By the end of that year, both people will have increased their pull-ups. The person who just did pull-ups all the time is going to be really, 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 really good at pull-ups. They're probably not going to be any better at climbing. Maybe superficially, they'll have some better upper body strength that will help them solve a few problems, but they're not going to develop all the rich techniques and reactions and familiarity and skills that come with climbing. On the other hand, the person who did a bunch of climbing all year round will probably still have gotten much better at pull-ups. Maybe they didn't get as good. Maybe the pull-up only brother got up to 15 and the climbing brother got up to 12, but you think of everything else that you're getting. So one of these issues with the way with this model of this top-down coaching is people try to eliminate all the variables to get this perfect form, but that means that you lose out on all the contextual richness that gets people good at things. The other thing I want to connect here, and this is big with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and combat sports as well, is this idea of perception action coupling. And I guess the best way to talk about this is to talk about mistakes that have been made in the past with training. So you still see it today. You see all kinds of apps and you'll see all kinds of expensive training gadgets in universities and with professional sports teams. And you'll see this idea that, okay, well, what we want to do with our athletes or someone is we want to improve their reaction time. We want to make their reactions better. So someone will come up with some kind of invention like, oh, it's a computer screen, and whenever a green light shows up on the screen, you go ahead and you hit the yes button, and whenever a red light shows up on the screen, you hit a no button. And then they train people in this in 6 months, and they say, your reaction time has gotten much, much better. All right. Now let's see if that's translated into you becoming a better hitter in baseball or cricket. And what they find is there's pretty much no carryover because reaction time isn't just some abstract thing that you can train. It's embedded in the environment, this idea of perception action coupling. So if you wanted to get someone better at hitting a ball, then you would put them in front of a real pitcher. They would see the movements that the pitcher makes as they throw the balls and they'd react to them. This is the same reason why there's a famous case of an American softball pitcher, a female softball pitcher who was able to go around America and strike out all the baseball hitters because they weren't used to her underhand pattern of throwing. So they hadn't developed the sort of skill transference. They hadn't developed the observational skills to do it. So the reason I have this picture of this woman boxing a robot is because you'll see all these drills that people have, their members do, their clients do, with this idea that it's going to transfer over to the real world. But actually, what we find is quite often these really isolated drills or these isolated tasks actually don't transfer over because they're not embedded in the environment. So you don't have that perception action coupling. So this gets to the role of the coach, and don't know I don't know who's in. I can't see everyone who's in today, but I did want to talk about this study with some people who've messaged me previously, and this is one of the things we shared on Circle pretty recently. So there's this paper down below called "There Must Be an Ideal Solution: Assessing Training Methods of Knife Defense," and this is kind of a famous paper that came out a few years ago, and it is in this paper, there were some police recruits and they were being taught knife defense. And there are two different groups. There was one group who was taught traditional knife defense, like traditional martial arts methods. And that would be something like, okay, hang on, I've lost my camera. There we go. If someone comes at you like this, then what you do is you go like that, and you go like that, and then you go like that, and then you do this, and then you take the knife off. So it's sort of like, the way that martial arts might be taught on a VHS tape or something like that. And they do this drill repetition over and over and over and over again. And the other group of police trainees, they were taught more of an ecological dynamic method, which is they did lots of games, they were playing, maybe they were given markers and they would try to tag each other and people would try to avoid it. Sometimes they'd be in the classroom and someone would randomly come in and pretend to be a knife attacker and they'd run and they'd defend themselves. And then at the end, there were tests. And what they found is that at the end, the people who were taught via this ecological dynamic, this sort of emergent, almost play-based method, ended up being much more effective at defending themselves from knife attacks. And then they did a follow-up in a few months, and they saw that also they retained these skills for much, much longer. The people who were taught these top-down methods, A, didn't learn as effectively, and B, forgot most of these methods and motor patterns within a matter of months. But, and here's the but, is when they interviewed the participants in both these studies, the people who were taught the top-down methods, these sort of traditional methods, they were much happier with the experience because they enjoyed being told what to do. They enjoyed being told that there was one best answer, whereas the participants who did this more emergent method, even though they were objectively much better at the end of it. They felt like they didn't get as much out of it because nobody told them what to do. So we have this sort of tension where people learn from solving problems and interacting with the environment, not memorizing phrases. But we have this issue where a lot of times people want to be told what the answer is. They want to be told how to do this. So this is another element of tension that we need to consider. So it's probably a good point now for me to come to this idea of this prescriptive emergent continuum. And it's one of these things that we struggled with quite a lot. And I think that Luke and Ellie, when you were on the course, I don't think we had really developed this. And I say developed, I stole it. And what I mean is I was really struggling with some of the tensions that I've talked about. So here some of the issues I was struggling with. I was like, I think ecological dynamics is good. But sometimes I need to coach and cue people to improve their form, you know? I think that playing games is really fun. I think that people learn by playing games, but sometimes it lacks what's called face validity. Sometimes people feel like they're not going to get better from playing games. Sometimes people sort of want to be told what to do. So, in this book, The Constraints-Led Approach, that I'll have more information on at the end for resources, but you can see it down in the bottom right. In chapter 4, I was looking at this, and this image down below, um, figure 4.2, they called it a continuum of practice task designs. And what they're saying is here, they're saying, you know what, it's perfectly okay to do some activities some days that are sort of more top-down prescriptive, and other days it's perfectly okay to do activities that are more emergent. So there are times when it makes sense to do highly specific activities that are highly structured, that involve teacher-led class format, that involve direct teaching and instructing, because there are going to be days when that's sort of more appropriate, depending on the why and the goals of what you're trying to do. But then there are also going to be times and situations where you want to do more varied activities, where you want to give space for discovery and learning and things like that. And you don't want to become too much of a purist about either one because there are benefits to each. So, and a lot of the times when we're coaching or when we're doing our course, we do spend a lot of time on this emergent side of things because most teachers, most coaches have never really been given the opportunity to play around with exploratory learning and task-based learning and this idea of facilitating activities rather than being the center. So, they talk about this idea of being the sage on the stage versus being, I forget what the other half of that rhyme is. Luke might know it. The guide on the side, A lot of teachers or a lot of people who've been in the position of teaching, whether it's through yoga or Pilates or traditional teaching, they're so used to being at the center sometimes it could be uncomfortable stepping back and letting people figure things out for themselves. So a lot of the coaching that we do in the course is really to try to get people comfortable with both and to play around with both. So it's exactly like you said, Ellie, you know, it is good to have an idea of points and performance. It is a good idea to have what you're trying to work towards and specifically thinking about the why of the movement. Um, because it also gives people confidence. But then at the same time, as a coach, I think it's very beneficial to develop a comfort with just designing activities and challenges and getting out of the way. And, you know, with a lot of what we do in our pathway and our on-ramp, the assumption is that you're a new coach who's working with a new community, so it's naturally going to be more hands-on, more traditional coaching. But the goal is over time that as your member in your community grows and they gain confidence, that you'll be able to inject more playful, more emergent opportunities. It's just that sometimes right away, like the analogy I was saying, if you've never danced before and someone turns on music and they tell you to start dancing, it's gonna be really awkward. But, you know, if you spend some time doing Scottish country dancing or line dancing or whatever, you sort of get comfortable with listening to the beats, listening to the music, learning how to express yourself. And then that gives you that opportunity. It's this concept of play begetting play, of familiarity with how to move your body, and physicality is going to open up more options for how to use your body and express physicality. So the takeaways that I would say here is, as a coach, really think about how you can design challenges, not just providing answers. Try to design activities where you give time and space to explore and create a culture of exploration, giving people that permission to explore. You really want to challenge but support. Cueing is fine. And when I say cueing, I mean all the traditional coaching techniques for getting people closer to an ideal form. But think about your why. Consider people's expectations and work within those expectations. If people do expect to be taught specifically, it's going to take time for them to build up their confidence to play around with different movements. And as always, learn and reiterate as you go. So some of the books that I used here, um, that I would really recommend, I think a good place to start is Rob Gray, How We Learn to Move, or Todd Hargrove, Playing with Movement. Those are very good. And then if you want to get into some more academic stuff, the constraints-led approach and nonlinear pedagogy and the athletic skills model, both of those are really excellent. On top of that, there's some podcasts. I can put them out, but Rob Gray's podcast, Perception Action, is very good. And then a lot of the top level academics that talk about this kind of stuff also have a podcast that I'll link to as well. All right, I'm going to open this up to whoever wants to talk. Maybe Jill. I don't know if you want to do any facilitation.
I was just going to say, if Shelby wanted to jump in, Shelby, I don't need to put you on the spot, but I know that when we first spoke to Shelby, we talked a lot about teaching at that kind of emergent side of things.
Yeah.
Shelby, can I find you? Where are you?
Um, Yeah, not to put Shelby on the spot, but Shelby is a coach that I've kind of learned a lot from, and she has some really great ideas for making movement feel alive and meaningful. But also, I don't want to put her on the spot, and I can't see where she is on my view. So,
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess the one thing I'll just say is something that I found really helpful in classes, whether we're doing strength and skill-based learning, is to add an open practice time. So even if that's just 10 minutes, where people are allowed to kind of jam or play or self-select, and to start, like you just said, Andrew, start building that culture into your classes as kind of a set and finite amount of time, people can tolerate that and grow that tolerance from
I think that's a really good point. And when I had the chat with Eugene Minogue the other day, he said something that really hit home with me. He's like, all my best memories of being on a sports team were the first 10 minutes and the last 10, 15 minutes of practice when we were just messing around and playing around and not doing the drilling, but all the different games and stuff that people would come up with. And I think that's really true. Having that time and space so people can play around, and we see it a lot in our classes. I really noticed it the other day. A lot of times, you know, the kids and children will come. So while the parents are doing the workout, you just see the kids in the back with bits of wood and logs and climbing and coming over tires. And they're really doing exactly the same stuff we're doing, but they're just kind of coming up with their own rules. They're kind of jamming with it. And yeah, I mean, that's gonna be really beneficial. I think that's a really good point. And Shelby, and it's something that I probably don't do enough in my own classes. I probably don't give enough time for people just to play and explore in the more rigid classes. So it's like one of those things that I can always think about doing better.
I think there's something around, well, just what Ellie was saying earlier as well. Some of our classes, it's particularly with older populations, and it's not just because it's useful with the older populations, but I mean any population that doesn't have kind of background in physical activity, we lean much more heavily into the play and exploration, and it's much more sort of play and games and less structured. And they know what they come for. That's kind of what they come for, and it's a kind of quite a silly and playful class. And then with our strength and conditioning, we have elements of play within it, but then we have elements of prescriptive coaching because those members want to that's kind of what they expect, but also we need to get them up to a level where we can throw lots of different things at them. So with that class, as they get stronger and more confident and they've learnt the basics, like they've got their kind of various deadlifts in, they've got their kettlebell skills in, we've done a bit of jumping, then we can actually open it up and make it much more emergent and more playful, because we know that those guys have kind of got the basic skills. So I guess we come to the emergent stuff later in the more strength and conditioning focused classes, if that kind of answers Ellie's question a bit more.
Yeah, it definitely does. I think that balance, you can see that certainly how the on ramps kind of how all of that works anyway, and that makes lots of sense. So yeah, thank you.
But at no point are we saying that a prescriptive model of teaching is bad. It's just horses for courses and depends on what your aim is. We definitely do still do prescriptive stuff, particularly if there's like a specific piece of equipment that needs to be used in a specific way, then you're all on the prescriptive end. And often, again, it does take people time if they come from an exercise background. It's pretty weird to come to a class where we're like, right, guys, we're just going to play around with some stuff, see what happens.
Yeah, I think I can see that from just doing sort of more informal things with friends. It's both confidence and then I think it's kind of curiosity as well. And the two seem to kind of go a bit together, that as people get more confident, they're more curious with what they can do and happy to play a bit more.
Yeah.
You're gonna have that feedback relationship again. Yeah, that play begets play, that confidence begets confidence, movement begets movement. Chloe. Oh,
Chloe on. Yeah. Andrew, can you take your screen share off?
sure.
Hi, Chloe.
Oh yeah, that's much better.
There you go.
Hi there. Yeah, I just wanted to echo like everything you've just said. It's like really, it just like kind of put some kind of like words onto what I've been experiencing. I do silks, so aerial silks, on top of loads of other things. And yeah, my teacher, like that's pretty much what she does. So she teaches us like the basics at the beginning. Like now we're like a proper group, but when we started, yeah, it was all like she didn't really know us as well, and we didn't really know her, and like trying to gauge like people's experience. And as we moved on, like she very much threw like quite a few times just problems at us to just trying to like, yeah, find solutions. And it's really interesting because I get really annoyed when she does that. And some other people like really love it. And I know, and I found that with myself as well, that there is very much like where I'm at on the day as well. If my head is full, it's like I like no, just provide me the solution. I'm just here to like have fun and like just I don't want to think. And I see that as well, like yeah, with so for some reason it's still so like no, just tell me what to do. But then when I go bouldering, it's the same. Like I see it with myself where like there are days where I can be, yeah, I want to find the solution on my own, and there are days where I'm just like looking around or like with my friends. So it's yeah, it's really interesting, and yeah, it completely echoes what you just said. Like so, yeah, thanks.
I know exactly what you mean, and I know that frustration too sometimes where people sometimes you've had a hard day at work and you just kind of want to go somewhere and you just want someone to tell you what to do, and I don't want to cast aspersions for yoga, but yoga is great for that because yoga, you kind of clear the brain, someone tells you what to do, you can be sort of focused in whatever it is that you want to focus on that day and you come over and get corrected. And I think there's benefits to being in that headspace. Um, And then, there are times when you really want to go in and try something new and explore. And the apparatus, the environment, the affordances, the assumptions of the class that matters so much, because with bouldering, you're sort of invited to try all these different things and these different problems, and you try it one way and you try it the other way, because especially because what works for me won't work for Jill, because I've got little short stubby arms and Jill's got big long arms, for example. So the way she can grab things can be much different from me. So it has to be a sort of your personal relationship with the environment, where something like silk or something else, it's not always so clear, because sometimes there is the best way to do a specific movement or specific trick. But it's just like you said, it's nice to be able to go back and forth and figure things out for yourself. Like, because for me, I'm someone who I can't be taught how to do something. I'm not a fast learner, but if I am going to learn it, I need to go off in the corner and just play around with it for myself, because I'm very bad. If someone tells me how to do something, it just goes in my head and just goes around, and it won't make any sense to me until I've done it myself. And it's like you said, different people have different learning patterns and different expectations. So yeah, very good observation.
And I feel for her, like for my teacher, because we've had that conversation many times, and it's just like it must be so hard for her, and I guess for everybody else here, like to actually design a class that sort of fits everyone or accommodates for everyone. It's just like, I mean, she's amazing. She's got that talent. I have no
Yeah.
idea how she does it, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. And it's one of those things we always try to find solutions to it, like Jill said. I think what we found works best for us is just having different sort of classes that, fall along the continuum. So actually, in the past, I've kind of had this Cartesian plane of where different things sit. So some might be like, high coaching feedback, high competition, high coaching feedback, low competition. It's boring. I'm not gonna explain it all, but trying to get these different quadrants to hit. And I found that often people are not really interested when I talk about it, but then people will gravitate towards certain classes, like, the movements for life, the nature moves classes we do are almost all play, and that works for one kind of person. And then, as Jill said, we have these sort of strength conditioning classes, and those are people who just want to come in, turn their brain off, and work hard. And that's fine, because you have to respect what people want to get out of a class. Um, any other questions, observations, or we could talk about any interesting resources or anything that people want to chat about? Oh, thanks, Shirley.
I will. Oh, so was that a question or was that Shelley off? Oh,
I think she's saying,
oh,
if she's still here, it would be interesting. Oh, surely you are still here. It'd be interesting to hear your take on with Pilates on this, if you feel comfortable talking about it, because I always really like to hear people's perspective.
Yeah, I teach mat Pilates, and I didn't train until I was in my mid-50s. And yeah, it's fascinating what you're talking about. And not so much to talk about the Pilates, but I do have to do strong cueing for people, and people want to be told what to do. But I was just thinking about when I was trying to learn to swim crawl, and I was having one-to-ones with a tutor, and I just found it impossible to
Yeah,
learn how to do crawl. My body just wouldn't do what she was asking me to do.
yeah.
Yeah.
Did you figure it out eventually on your own?
No.
Yeah. Is that's one of the interesting things. There's been a lot of really good research on constraints-led approach and ecological dynamics with swimming, and it's actually one of the images I didn't put in, but I was
Mm,
thinking about it. And I think a lot of people have had this experience of never really learning how to swim, or maybe their children have gone to swim classes, they never really learn how to swim, and then they have that one summer where they stay at a place where there's a pool, or they stay near a beach or something like that, and over the process of the
mm,
summer, the children become more and more confident in swimming. So the classic picture you'll see in a textbook is the importance of having like a low sort of sloping um, incline, I guess, decline into the water, and the difference between jumping in a pool and having to swim right away, and being
mm,
able to engage with the environment and slowly getting more and more confident with the water is obviously the way that a lot of people learn how to swim. But then the crawl is so interesting, because it's a very specific way
yeah.
of how to swim. And what I always think is interesting, I always think there are all these styles of swimming, that actually fell out that never got codified to the Olympics. So, you know, if you go to old parts of, you know, in the UK, they have all these interesting side strokes and backstrokes and things that were never codified in the Olympics, so everyone's forgotten them. But they used to have all these formalized other ways of swimming that have just sort of fallen out. And it's, you know, it's very much whenever you try to codify something and say this is the way to do it, what you're really doing is you're taking the experience of something that worked for one person and trying to apply it for everybody, which always makes it very complicated. Um, and yeah, what they found with swimming is actually, yeah, you just sort of need to give people space to figure it out for themselves and then lead them towards different solutions based on if they want to swim fast or quietly or long distance. Um, but you know, generally teaching kids how to swim systematically is so hard, and it takes years and years and years to get people comfortable in the water when you teach them that way. So there's been a big discussion in swim teaching now, and see if there are some better ways to do it. Brett and Lydia, maybe. Brett?
Hi, yeah, I'm also a level 3 and level 4 Pilates teacher, and I think this is a really interesting discussion because Pilates can be so prescriptive. But I almost think that it's a different kind of goal and a different kind of context. So Pilates is really good if you want to be told what to do, kind of like in yoga, but it's also very good at correcting specific imbalances and maybe rebuilding movement post-injury and getting on board certain neuromuscular recruitment patterns that maybe aren't there. And when you're playing, you're doing task-based movement and you're just using more of those global muscles, you're doing something a lot different. So I don't know if it's necessarily at odds with each other. I think they just have different goals and different things they're doing. But equally, I think if you could kind of like took a Pilates approach into an outdoor fitness class, it would make it very tedious and boring. So it's
Yeah.
interesting, like looking at that continuum. I think it's an interesting concept to think about and just sort of think about maybe different things are there for different reasons because they have different objectives.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Thinking about the why, you know, it's like you said, you know, Pilates is really a specific way of looking at things. You know, it's really formed, you know, from the work of one person who sort of had this sort of complete coherent system. And it, you know, it's quite high control, relatively low variability, trying to hit these different things. And it's exactly like you said, it's a completely different goal, which doesn't make it worse and actually makes it very good for some things. I think another good example is Feldenkrais, you know, where Feldenkrais has a lot of task-based stuff and a lot of internal self-exploration. Um, you know, but then um, there are quite a lot of Feldenkrais instructors who go on to embrace ecological dynamic ideas. So I think these things are complementary, and it's very much, you know, like the blindfold men touching the elephant, trying to make sense of movement. Brett, your hand's still up. Did you have a follow-up?
I'm gonna put it down.
Okay. I'm not sure if you meant to or not, but Lydia, I think your hand went. Oh, Anne. Hi, Anne. You can go.
Hi, sorry, I couldn't find the right button.
Oh, that's okay.
I'm actually quick introduction to myself. I'm joined the meeting from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I'm an aquafit instructor. So
Oh.
when you touched onto the swimming, I just kind of wanted to bring in because a lot of it is exploratory.
Yeah.
They're in the water, they're working with buoyancy, they're working with resistance. As a coach leader, it's a really, sorry, I just got sun on my eye. It's pulling me to
okay.
the morning here, sorry. So it is that same thing. You're coaching and you're saying this is what the goal is, but do
Yeah.
it the best you can because they're working with that. They're exploring with the
Yeah.
water. They're working with turbulence and they're working with resistance.
Yeah, it makes
So
sense.
they've got an environmental aspect to what they're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, you're exactly right. The waters there's so much feedback in the water, and that's the good thing about working in the real world and having it be task-based is that
Mm-hmm.
you have this rich, constant feedback that you can learn from, you know, and then you know it's task-based in that are you getting from A to B, you know, are you doing it
Yeah.
quickly and things like that. So I think any kind of system where you do get that environmental feedback, I think it's just going to be a rich avenue for that exploration, like you were talking about.
So I am just to my own self. I am now moving into doing land and doing exactly what you're striving for. So I thank you very much, everybody, for the opportunity to learn this new aspect for me for taking.
Yeah, thanks for joining. Thanks for contributing. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
I'm mindful that we're just at time now, but I'm very happy to take a few questions if anybody else is here. I see. Oh, Lydia. Hi, Lydia. Um, I'll just read it out if it's okay. Lydia says, fellow Pilates teacher here. Hi. You can talk too if you want. If you want to say it better, it's either or. Do you want
Yeah,
to talk?
it was just yeah, interesting and nice to hear there's other Pilates teachers on here as well. But yeah, what Chloe was saying actually made me just really think back to I used to be a school teacher and that concept of when she was saying sometimes when her aerial silks teacher sets her a problem and she's just like, I don't want to have to think or problem solve, but actually the benefits you get from that. And yeah, when I was a school teacher, like kids just want to be told, right? They want to have a textbook page to read and questions to answer. They don't want to do the activity that's going to make them use their brain more. And I guess I maybe haven't as explicitly linked that to my Pilates teaching now, but Chloe just really helped me make that connection, which was one thing I wanted to say. And also the idea in, I think it was Shirley and Brett mentioned like Pilates can be exceptionally like prescriptive and prescribed and understandably because some of the underlying principles are like moving with control and moving with precision, but I try and find this balance where there's some exercises or maybe like fundamental things where we use that control and precision, but then some exercises where there's room for play. And it's interesting how sometimes clients can actually be reluctant to play. And I guess some of the other Pilates teachers might know an exercise like the seal or something where I'm like, just play, like have fun. We don't have to be perfect. But maybe through years of Pilates, they're all a bit like, I don't want to use the word uptight, but like these regimented movement patterns and trying to find those places for play as well as the control and precision that Pilates is known for. It's like that balance. And yeah, just to say thank you. No, it's interesting
Yes.
to hear people's thoughts on different activities.
Yeah, thanks for your input. Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because there's the expectations of going into a Pilates class, because Pilates is like a known entity. People come in and they sort of know what to expect. Yeah, it is challenging. I mean, because you're a teacher, then obviously one of the conversations that's been happening in teaching over the last 30, 40 years is the idea of student-centered learning versus teacher-centered. And that's really what a lot of this is. And I think there's a reason why, I think there's a structural reason why a lot of classes or classroom environments become teacher-centered, because it's about, obviously there's financial and logistical aspects to it.
Time, I think,
And
is a lot
time,
of it as well.
big thing, that's a really big thing. Exploration takes more time.
Mm.
And if the incentive of a teacher is if you need to get the kids ready for a standardized test, then you don't really have the time to explore, even though it'd be great in a certain world. You sort of do need to go that more rote way. And I'm not going to compare Pilates to that because it's a different thing, but Pilates, because you are really specifically working towards a set of skills and capabilities and control and stability and everything like that. I think it's a very good foundational thing. And it'd be very hard to do Pilates specifically in a sort of like emergent ecological way, especially because a lot of the cues are internal as opposed to external. So it's focusing on how things make you feel, which again isn't a good or bad thing. I think it's very good as Brett said, to build up awareness and build up strength and capabilities and things like that. So it's and that's really what this continuum is about, is that it's horses for courses is a different tool for a different job. And I think as always in teachers and coaches and however you think about yourself, really what you want to do is you sort of want to equip yourself with as many different tools and angles as possible. And all the time, even when I'm teaching, sort of in a more playful context, sometimes I need to change hats really quick and try to give somebody, maybe a bit more hands-on cueing for a little bit, because I think that's probably what they need right now, and I don't want them to get frustrated. And sometimes just a little bit of nudge can help. So it's just about gaining the experience and kind of figuring out what works for people at that given point in time.
Thanks.
Right, I'm gonna call it. Thank you very much for coming, everyone. That was really good. Thank you, Andrew. Next month we are back. We're gonna try and do I realised that Shelby's on the call and I haven't told her about this. We're going to try and do a live cast, which is like a sort of live podcast with Shelby and Erin, who have both been on our podcast and who also work in this kind of space. It's actually at the beginning of June rather than May, so it was a slightly different date, but I'll send around the dates for that. And then at the end of June, we've got one on a kind of strength training, how, with the specifics of how to build muscle mass and how you can do it at home with a friend without spending too much money on loads of equipment. Anyway, we'll send round the recording. We will record the first 9 minutes again, and I'll put it together magically at the end. Thanks so much, guys, for coming and for all the really good questions. We'll share this in the email, and if you've got any other questions that come up at all, please let us know.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for showing up. Appreciate it.